What is up, everybody? Star Wars Dad back for another video. Today, I wanted to do something a little different and kind of look at 15 different decks that I think are competitive, and decks that you might see at tournaments, and decks that might be on the rise or have a chance at being successful. Before we get started with today's video, if you enjoy my content, please make sure to join my Patreon as a free or paid member, which is just getting started. I have a lot of great content and giveaways here. And make sure to smash that like and subscribe button and sign up for the 3,000 subscriber giveaway so you don't miss out on that. So in today's video, I got together a list of 15 different decks that I think are relevant with the right player and the right circumstances. I think, which is what I love about where we're at with set 3. I think there's a lot of different decks that can be competitive. I love seeing the results from the Birmingham tournament with the 200 players because it was, there was probably about 10, 11, 12 decks that went 6-2 or better, which is really healthy. Just shows how diverse things are at. And, we saw 2 Sabines, 2 Jangos in the top 8, which, those are the 2 format defining decks is what I would, consider those. Anytime I'm making a deck, I'm like, okay, what's my Sabine game plan? That's like literally the first thing I do when I'm building a deck is like, how can I make sure I beat that deck? Because I don't play Sabine. I'm not going to play Sabine anytime soon. Not interested. Just, it's not, I do think it's cool and everything. I think it's a cool deck. I just think it's not my style of play. And so any deck that I'm building it to beat that. I think even with Sabine, you need to have a game plan to beat Sabine because you're going to run into it every single time you play in a tournament, just about, right? Same with Jango. Jango's a newer archetype, but it's one of those decks that just can run you over. And if you don't have a game plan for decks like that, you're just going to be in big trouble. So these 2 decks, although they may not win always, although Jango has been winning, but they're just format defining. Like you have to have a game plan for both of those decks with any deck that you build. So this is a Sabine list I think that's finished top 8 at that tournament. So when I look at this list, I don't see anything that's any different from any of the lists that I've seen. Maybe the 2 General Dodonna, I probably wouldn't play those and don't think it's that great. I kind of like the Jyn Erso because it has Saboteur and it's a 2-drop. I would probably play like Heroic Sacrifice in my list if I was going to play. Just because I think Heroic Sacrifice is amazing because you get to get in for more damage and draw a card, which is insane for 1 resource. It's such a ridiculously good card. But yeah, I mean, you're just looking at a typical Sabine list. Not much has changed with this list from set 3, but you have to be prepared for this deck. I guess they are playing Bright Hope, though, as a way to deal with Jango, like to slow them down. And when they get into those races. Looking at a Jango deck here. This is one of the ones that finished in the top 8 as well. When you're building decks to deal with this deck, you really have to have a plan for all these space units, whether it's Sentinels, whether it's specific types of removal, because if you don't have a plan, they're just going to run you over in space. They don't need to be on the ground. If you notice that their ground units aren't that great early on in the game, they have the heavy Persuader tank for later, but this particular version is just heavy space. So if you're heavy on the ground, you're not going to stand a chance because they're gonna outpace you. They have Breaking In, they have Surprise Strike, they have Triple Dark Raid, they have Daring Raid, Ruthless Raider, Fet's Fire Spray. So many things that could just instantly do damage to you and pump up the damage. And one of my favorite cards in here is Elite Starfighter. It's such a sweet card. I love that card in here. I love it in Palpatine Yellow. I think it makes Palpatine Yellow even better. I did a video on Jango Red with it, which is the underworld focused version, which is more on the ground and about using Now There Are 2 of them, which I think that version is very good too. It still has 4 or 5 space units, but not as heavy space focused as this. But you have to have a game plan for this particular version because this is the more popular version. Vambrace Flamethrower is absolutely nuts in this deck, especially on the one that I'm playing it with, where I play 3 of those, where they can just, once Jango Fett's been deployed, they can exhaust 3 units. They're just exhausting things, tempoing you out, using No Good to Me Dead, Cartel Spacer as well to exhaust you, in addition to the things that damage you when they come in. So just so many ways to exhaust your units and just outpace you. So, I think that Control has a very good matchup against Jango. Bossk Blue, I could even see Iden Blue becoming more relevant, and I'll talk about that deck a little later on in this video, because they've gotten some good cards to deal with heavy space decks like this. Everyone knows about Perilous Position, but Equalize is another one that's incredible, especially in Iden Blue. But I mean, I think we will see a little more Control decks on the rise as the meta is starting to form and shape, so that because Control really needs that understanding of what it's up against to start preparing for. So I do think that we'll see more Control, but you have to be prepared for this deck. You have to have a game plan no matter what you're playing to be able to deal with this. You might need to go heavier in space. You might need to have more specific removals to deal with these, like making openings or Perilous Position or takedowns, open fires, whatever. Bossk Blue. So I think Bossk Blue clearly is one of the best decks in the format. It's my top choice of a deck to play right now. I think Bossk Blue got even better this set. Merciless Contest is just an incredible card for Control decks, because if you notice, it says each player chooses a non-leader unit they control to defeat those units. So, for Bossk in particular, that, if you pull out Bossk or Iden Blue, you can kill a big threat for 3 resources and your leader will stay alive. You don't have to sacrifice it, which is cool. Obviously, it's not, I can't kill their leader, which should be noted, but we also have Perilous Position, which is really important, and it's just been an amazing card. It pairs very, very well with Palpatine and Snoke. It just makes those cards even better. This deck will continue to be one of the strongest Control decks, just because of the earlier interaction with the bounties, the advantage that you get with the bounties on the Bossk flip turn, the fact that Bossk comes out on 5 resources and can put pressure on your opponent or just play good defense to slow your opponent down. You see we have a ton of 3 resource pieces of removal with Power of the Dark Side, Open Fire, Merciless Contest, Perilous Position. Then we have 3 making openings in the side, 3 force chokes to deal with aggro. It's just aggro in general is going to have a really hard time with this deck. I think that the decks that give this deck more of a difficult time are going to be decks like Kylo Yellow or Red, and like Han2 Wide, decks that just go really, really wide early on, and Bossk can't deal with all the threats, and it's just enough damage to get over the top before Bossk gets to its bigger payoffs around the 8 resource turn. As a Control player, I love this deck. It's so much fun to play it. The payoffs of Palpatine, Snoke, Avenger, and Krayt Dragon are just such awesome cards, and they get even better with with the addition of Perilous Position to go alongside and make an opening to weaken everything. All your removal gets better with those 2 cards. It's really a fun deck. I would say Bossk struggles against like Han Yellow for sure. I would say some Palpatine decks, Hand Disruption to a certain extent. My version, I play 54 cards in the main, so it's a little less weak to mill strategies, which are also one of its weaknesses, because it draws cards. You can potentially mill Bossk out. I also have a little more of a game plan in my current list, prepping for more Control mirrors, because I do think that will start to happen more now that Bossk has had such strong success. And there was 2 or 3 other Bossk Blue lists in the top 30 or 40 decks, so this wasn't the only one that it was prevalent. There's 3 other lists, I think, that went 6 and 2, if I'm not mistaken. So it had a big showing. Next is Palp Yellow. I think this is one of the best decks too. I just did a video on this deck if you want to check it out. My version's a little bit different than Joshua's. Joshua's obviously a very good player, so you have to take that into account when you're seeing a deck like this. And this deck is, you know, a higher skill deck. This deck takes a lot of playtesting, but this deck has good matchups across the board. I think its toughest matchups are obviously aggro. Like that's the area where things can get dicey for this deck because, you know, if they're pushing damage on you every turn, you know, this deck can have a problem with that if you don't find the right answers at the right time. It definitely can still beat aggro, but I would say aggro is favored, especially in this version. And I think in the tournament he lost to aggro the one time he played against it, so he dodged it for most of the day. I mean, Palpatine in general is going to just absolutely destroy mid-range decks that aren't pushing damage as much because it has, you know, such great ways to deal with all those type of things, and then the payoffs are so much better than a mid-range deck. Like we have Vader, Maul, Reinforcement Walker, Devastator, and then Palpatine's Return, and then even Cad Bane in the sideboard. And just, you know, you're using No Good to Me Dead, Waylay, and Change of Heart to slow down those mid-range decks. So, you know, that can be really, really powerful. And Palp has good answers for control. I would say that's really more going to be about the players. So, like, you know, you could win against control pretty often with this deck, I think. But when you run into a really good player, that's where things are going to get much more 50-50 and who finds the right cards at the right time. I mean, you know, that's where the argument to play Relentless is a card that I always consider. Change of Heart's obviously very good. Cad Bane, I think, is really good. Palpatine's Return's really good. But that matchup is, I think, becomes more about the player. But you definitely have a good matchup there in general, on paper at least. But aggro is definitely the way you got to figure things out. My version is a little more Sentinel focused to deal with aggro. But I definitely think this is just one of those strong decks, and it got better with Confederate Curry, Poggle, Droid Commando, and Elite Starfighter. All those cards fit really, really nice into what Palpatine is trying to do of like being able to create the droids and have things to sacrifice that make sense. Even Cobb Vanth makes sense in here to sacrifice to gain value out of defeating your cards while pinging for a damage while drawing a card, so you're getting like a triple value in some cases. Even sacrificing Starfighter to do an additional damage, and of course when you're pinging things and you're setting up your Palpatine deploy turn to steal things. So it's a super fun deck. I really love playing this deck. It's been one of my favorites since set 1, and I think this is a deck that you have to account for. I mean, if you're playing aggro, you know, you just have to have a good game plan and try to get in for as much damage as possible early, and really try to finish them off before they get to, like, really it's like 7 resources, but I would say even earlier than that, because 7 resources, that's when things are going to start flipping in their favor, for sure. But, you know, you got to get your reps in for a deck like this as a player and to play against it if you're worried about this matchup. But it's definitely one you're going to start seeing more of. In set 1, we saw a lot of this deck doing really well at the end of set 1. I don't know if you remember that. Set 2, we definitely saw it have some success, but it wasn't as much. I think we will see more of it now, because I've already seen 2 top 4s of this deck in the early meta of set 3. Next on the list is Qi'ra Green. I think you still have to account for this deck. This particular list went 6-2 in the tournament. That was this past weekend. But I like this list here because I think you should always play Hilo Bond Enforcer. It just gives you a 3/2 powered unit with a shield once you do 2 damage to it. So it's just a really good way to deal with things on the ground, to take out 2 units. Like, that's such a good way to deal with aggro. I still like the ECL version myself too, because of the ability to just deal with threats with your units as well as with your removal. Of course, this deck got Perilous Position 2. My list looks a little different. I like having 3 Perilous Position. The card's just so good. The 2 Viper Probe Droid makes sense as well, just as another way to deal with units on turn 1 on the ground. Only 1 Dr. Pershing. I might play 2, just as a way to be consistent for those hand disruption decks that might start to be more prevalent if control and soft control start to take over more. The Calculating Magna Guard's nice as it comes in as a Sentinel, and then when something dies on your board, it's a Sentinel, which you can do fairly easily with Qi'ra's ability to kill your own things to make Calculating Magna Guard a Sentinel again. And then they have the Black Sun Starfighter and the Devastating Gunship as a way to deal with like Jango decks, having more space units in the Inferno 4, and then the 2 Avenger and the Devastator. So this is a pretty well-rounded list. I like to play 2 Gideon in my list just because Gideon is so strong at closing the game out a little bit quicker. But overall, this looks like a good list. I really like it. But yeah, I mean, this is a deck that had a ton of success in set 2. I think you still have to account for it. It's still going to be there. You know, this deck will still get better as we see more and more, and it'll start to figure out how to beat Jango and things like that. So it's still a deck you need to account for. It's still one of the best decks in the game. It's just a deck that has solid matchups across the board. I would say hard control and hand disruption are probably its biggest weaknesses. Han Yellow, another one. That's just this is a very, very strong deck. The issue with this deck, as far as being prepared for it, is that it's really a hard deck to pilot. I would say it's the hardest deck in the game to pilot right now. It's up there if it's not the hardest. And so I don't think a lot of players play it. So if you run into somebody who's really good with this, like, you're gonna have a hard time. This deck is very, very good. But this deck is one of those decks that takes a solid 100 games of playtesting to be, like, good. And you really have to play this deck against every matchup to get good with it. But if you're, I would say you don't have to worry about it as much because you're not going to see it as much. But when you do see it, if it's a good player, yeah, good luck. It's maybe one you don't have to play test as much, if depending on how much time you have to play test, because you're not going to see it that often. But it's just a very strong deck. If you play this deck, I would just say play against everything, at every single matchup of these 15 decks that I'm about to share with you, and just get a feel for them, because across the board I think it can beat just about anything, but it is very hard to play it. But it's super fun once you get a feel for it. I mean, Cunning is just still one of the most amazing cards in the game. Body Rook is nuts. The DJ play is nuts. Especially getting it out early. I mean, attack is so much fun. I like Emphy's Nest as a new addition to this deck. Plo Koon is another great addition. Spare the Target is a sweet card. It's nice to see that in here. Breaking In is another good addition. I mean, this deck's just sweet. I really like this list too. I'm definitely going to playtest this list out soon. But another one of the best decks in the game. Palp Blue. I think Palp Blue got a little better. I think it's kind of similar to like a Qi'ra Green in what it's able to do as far as like its matchups across the board. I think it has a little weaker of a matchup against aggro than Qi'ra Green does, because it doesn't flip as early. So that's always going to be Palp Blue's weakness, is aggro. But I think if you have a strong game plan, and his particular game plan here in this list was using the Royal Guard to slow things down, using Yularen to gain subtle life, using Salacious Crumb to gain subtle life, to ping things, and then he had a lot more removal in this list. And then your top end, you're gaining life with Reinforcement Walker and Snoke to take things out. He has Vigilance to gain life. I don't see top target. I would probably play top target myself if I was going to play this deck. And then 3 making openings. And then 2 traders, so that's another way to deal with aggro. So, I definitely think that this deck gets even better. He also has the 3 devotion, okay. So instead of top target, he's doing the devotion. So he had a solid game plan, and that's why he finished second, I think, in that tournament last weekend. I'm not sure how much aggro he ran into. I would guess only 1, I think, from my recollection. But again, that's going to be the matchup that you don't want to see if you're playing this deck. But it's another one you got to be, get some playtesting in against it. It's a very strong deck. It has a lot of really big payoffs. They're just trying to stall you out, slow you down, so that they can get to their end game, which is Vader, Reinforcement Walker, Snoke, and Avenger, and Devastator. Again, they don't have Relentless in here. I think Relentless will probably be played more going forward, because Control will start to pick up the pace with being represented more as the meta shapes up more. 2 Clones really cool. I like that card a lot. I think it has a lot of potential. And then the 3 Perilous Position, of course. Again, I think Perilous Position makes this deck even better. Just another answer for so many things, for strong units, for leaders, just units that have dark sabers. It just really helps you in the early game. And of course, it sets up Snoke, makes your removal even better for the later game with your Snoke and Perilous Position and making openings. I was looking for Yeah, they don't play Overwhelming Barrage. Interesting. Okay. Cad Bane Red. This one had a lot of success. I saw a ton of these lists in the top 30 or 40 decks. I want to say like 5 or 6 of them, and they all were 6 and 2 or better. So this is absolutely a relevant deck. Like, and it, I think it kind of plays a little similar to my Jango Red deck, where I'm focused on the Underworld synergy, and then now there are 2 of them, which is what they're doing here. They have a bunch of Underworld decks, and now there are 2 of them. So very similar to my Jango deck in that regard. The difference is that they're pinging with Cad Bane every time they play an Underworld unit, which makes a lot of sense. So and that Jango Red deck that I did the video on, that deck felt very, very good. It's just about the same thing. I mean, we're trying to cheat out Bossk Zuckuss on turn 2, Forlom even on turn 2 if we don't have Bossk or Zuckuss, and then Cad Bane we're trying to cheat out on a 5 resource turn. I like the addition of Bamboozle. It's kind of like a alternate No Good to Me Dead where they can return each upgrade. So I guess they were expecting to see a lot of lightsabers and things like that in their matchups. Jango is cool. It lets you search for, now there are 2 of them, in Waylays and McClunkies, which is really sweet. I like it. I think, I'm not sure I would play 3, but it makes sense. I like it. But yeah, this is a strong deck. I think it struggles against control, and from what I saw in the matchups on Twitch, and I would imagine, because it's not going as wide. It's kind of just playing one unit, maybe 2 units a turn. So control is able to really slow them down. And if they're not able to like push damage, and they don't have that ECL factor, it can be hard to beat control. I think they may have to do more to kind of adjust if control starts to be more and more relevant, which I think it will. This deck might have to add in more hand disruption, like Unmasking the Conspiracy, if they don't have that in here, which I don't see it, and just kind of pushing more damage with things like Daring Raid. And I don't know. I think that's just going to be a tough matchup across the board for them. Maybe Crate Dragon needs to be in here as a way to deal with control, as a top end way. But yeah, this is a super strong deck. I would just say get a bunch of playtesting against this on Force Table if you're not familiar with this matchup, because it was a little different. But it, now there are 2 of them, just gives this deck a big boost in power. I love that. I love that card. I think it's so cool, and it makes a lot of sense with all the Underworld synergy to just put it in the Cad Bane if you're going to go the now there are 2 of them route instead of Jango. Although the Jango one was cool too with the Van-based flamethrower, but this is a really sweet deck. So definitely going to be one you have to be prepared for. Anakin Blue. So from my understanding from that tournament from last weekend, it had it was the most represented deck at like 30 decks, I think, out of 200. But overall, its record wasn't very good. There were still some lists that went 6-2 and did really well. I think this was one of them, which is using, what's unique about this deck? In my list, I do things a little different, similar to this deck, but I'm using Razor Crest to get back my top targets to deal with aggro decks, because Razor Crest has such great synergy with top target, and even Perilous Position to get those cards back from your discard pile, your upgrades, and Jedi Lightsaber too. Yeah, I mean, I would play top target. It seems like they had a strong game plan for Jango with the Red 3s, the Razor Crest. I'm not sure why they're not playing Restored Arc. I don't know if there was a glitch, so maybe they were. So yeah, they're playing 3 Restored Arc. There's some glitch where like it wouldn't show Restored Arc on the image, so they're definitely playing 3 Restored Arc in here, and 2 Anakin's Interceptor. So yeah, they had a strong space plan to deal with Jango. The Bravado Anakin play, of course, is amazing. So is the Perilous Position play, where you can overwhelm a unit with Perilous Position, and then attack again with Bravado to get in for a ton of damage with Anakin. So it's definitely a strong deck. I think it may have to adjust a little bit because it didn't have as much success, but I think the lists that did have success are the ones you need to pay attention to because they did things better. Again, I would probably add top target to deal with have an additional way to gain life with Jango and Jango on the rise and Sabine decks, because that can still be a problem for Anakin, just to get run over by those type of decks, and just being able to raise your crest and get your top targets back and immediately play them because they're only one resource, and just continue to cycle them like that is really sweet. So, but overall, good looking list, fun deck, and I think it's a strong one. Bossk Green was represented in the top 30 or 40 decks. I saw a couple of lists that went 6 and 2. You know, I think I like the addition of Clone. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that was different. He does play Toro Calican in here, which is cool. I would imagine you've played against Bossk Green at this point, but you know, it can be a really difficult matchup against a good player. And it's and I like the top targets at 3 costs. That makes a lot of sense. I also, in my version, I play Client because you can get it with Bounty Hunter Crew and with Vader, which I don't see any Vaders. So a little different than mine, but I like the addition of Client because Client's just so good with Bossk Blue Leader, and that helps you in those aggro matchups. Their control plan, I would imagine, is Crate Dragons, Reinforcement Walkers, Clones. Again, Vader helps against control, and then they're just being, you know, early pressure, and Ruthless Raider is helpful too. But good overall list, another deck to be prepared for. A fun one as well. Quinlan Green, Quinlan Blue, I think both of those felt really good when I was testing them. This is one that went 6 and 2, this particular version. They weren't using ECL. They didn't have a ton of life gain units either. In my green version, I have a ton of life gain. Just as a way to like counter those decks that are prevalent right now with Sabine and Jango Red and just kind of slow them down. Their space plan was Falcon and Bright Hope in Home 1. I think you probably want to have a little bit more than that. Maybe Ozatuk Liberator Gunship, especially because it comes in with Ambush as a way to just deal with those space heavy decks like Jango. Would be a strong consideration. I like the addition of Plo Koon in here and Han Solo and Emphy's Nest. So they went more the cunning aspect cards. I like Crafty Smuggler in here. I like the 3 new R2-D2s as well. Quinlan has a lot of potential. It's, you know, it's a new archetype. I think everyone's still trying to figure out Quinlan. I really like the blue version, and I like now there are 2 of them in my versions. Definitely check out my videos on those if you haven't seen those yet. But it's a good overall looking list. And of course, General's Blade helps you to cheat out Home 1 and Han Solo at what 5 and 6 resources, which is really cool if you're able to pull that off. So I think I really, especially because are they playing Baby Echo? No, they're not playing Baby Echo. I really like the Baby Echo, Big Echo line of play. Definitely check out my videos on that as well. And I also did a recent updated article on Quinlan Blue on my Patreon. Iden Blue is the next one. So I just did an article on this on my Patreon and play tested this a lot. I do think that this deck will become more relevant now that things are kind of shaping up, and I think it's a really good way to deal with Sabine and Jango Red. It just has so much removal in here and so much life gain and plain vigilance at 4 cost, and then it gets the addition of Equalize, and you know you're not playing a lot of units, so a lot of times you can be able to give 2 things -2/-2 at 3 resources, which is amazing. And then you can do that as early as turn 2, but also to completely obliterate their board potentially. And then also on your 6 resource turn, you can play that alongside another Equalize to basically give two things -4/4 in a turn, or pair it alongside Perilous Position or Power of the Dark Side or Merciless Contests or Make an Opening. You just have so many 3 resource removals in this deck, and it just really helps the consistency of this deck early on to deal with threats, especially because Merciless Contest and Power of the Dark Side are very good pieces of removal in addition to Equalize and Perilous Position. In my particular list right here, we're playing 54 cards, I believe, because we're playing the 3 tech, and tech is just nuts in here because For one, it just basically means that our entire deck we can play at any time, because we are also playing a Fine Edition, and we're also playing Bounty Hunter Crew and Restock, right? So basically with Tech, we have access to all of our resources. With Bounty Hunter Crew, we have access to all of our events in our discard pile. With Fine Edition, we have access to all of our upgrades in our discard pile. Like, we can get back Perilous Position, we can get back Top Target, we can get back Entrenched. So it's just really, really consistent and very strong. This is another one of those decks that has good matchups across the board. I would say, again, and your weaknesses are going to be like Han Yellow, super aggro decks like Kylo Red, Kylo Yellow, and Han2 Wide, where they just push too much damage too quickly for Iden to deal with all the removal, or to deal with all the units. But I think this is a deck that you might see more of. Again, this is a more high skill deck, so you're not going to see it as much. It's not a deck you're going to see at your locals, because people don't have friends when they play this deck all the time, because it's not fun to play against. Basically, the win cons here are Snoke combined with Equalize, Make an Opening, Takedown, and Perilous Position. It just gets so much better as a closer, and then Avenger. And then your other win con is just milling your opponent out. So the games with this deck are going to take a lot longer. But this is one you might want to be prepared for, because I would imagine that you'll see more of this as things continue to shape up. But I think this is a very, very strong deck. Han2 Wide, I mentioned that a few times. I think I saw another one to briefly mention is Han Blue. I didn't see any Han Blue decks in the results. I might have missed one or two. But either way, it was Anakin Blue was the deck of choice as far as these colors go. But I still think that cheating units in is always going to be a really strong effect for a leader to have. And I think a lot of people are just trying out Anakin. It's a new archetype. It's pretty cool. But I think you'll see more Han Blue come back around. I still think that this deck has a lot of potential, especially just the ability to play discard effects alongside cheating units in. I think is just a really, really powerful combination, especially really powerful units. So I do think that you will see this list. I still think this list has good matchups across the board. I mean, it had a ton of success in set 2. So, sometimes when we get the new shiny toy, everyone's excited about that, and they want to try out those new leaders, which makes a lot of sense. But I think this is one that'll come back around, and it'll adjust to where things are at and adjust to Jango. You can see in my list I've tried to adjust to Jango with more space units, but still might need a little more tweaking to deal with that. Maybe Obi-Wan unit. One list that went 6 and 2, and this deck had moderate success in set 2. I saw a few different times that it won tournaments with 30-40 people, and it just the ability to just go wide. But you're trying to cheat things out on turn 1, play Maz Kanata. You're just trying to go as wide as possible, just so you can have as many 1-drops as possible on turn 1, so you can really turn Maz Kanata into a 3/3 potentially. I do think that this deck is very strong either way. It's a very boring deck. The skill level of this is, I would say, on the easy side, but it's one you got to be prepared for, because I think because it's easier, you'll see it played more often, and it's just very simple. I'm just going as wide as possible, and I'm just pushing damage every turn. I'm cheating things out with Han's ability, and then I'm my top end game plan for control is to push as much damage as possible, and then play home 1 to get things back, and K2SO to use Desperate Attack or Heroic Sacrifice, depending on the list, for a cause I believe in is good. It's just one of those decks you got to be prepared for. Very, very aggressive. Kylo Yellow. This is one of the lists that went 6 and 2. So again, kind of similar to Jango Red, similar to Cad Bane Red a little bit. A little more space heavy in this particular version. But I do think it's, the cool thing about this list, I think, is that it has Sneak Attack and Fallen Lightsaber, which is different than Jango. Fallen Lightsaber, obviously, to push a ton of damage with Kylo Ren on its flip turn. Force Choke is really strong with Kylo. You can play it at 1 resource. And the Triple Dark Raids, of course, to push damage with your space units. They're not playing Fett's Fire Spray, of course, which is one of the differences from Jango. But, this is another one of those lists that could just be really strong, and something you want to be on the lookout for, and I think it has potential. This one was cool. This one went 6 and 2 as well. This is more, it has a ton of life gain for aggro. It has the mill component built in for control decks, and it just has a ton of card advantage because you're drawing cards with Kuil, Yoda, Obi-Wan. Yoda's a, Yoda the leader. You're cycling cards. You're drawing with Ki-Adi-Mundi. Um, you're cheating things out with your My Only Hope. I've been messing around with this list a little bit more. I'm going to try to do a video on this one soon, I think. Mine's a little different, but, the mill strategy is really strong in here. They play 2 restock, 3 vigilance, of course, at 4 cost because they're playing double blue. They play a couple equalize to benefit from that, playing in the double blue aspect. They play a lot of double blue sentinels like Duchess Champion and Bendu. I love Bendu. Bendu's such a sweet card. So you can play things 2 cost cheaper with Bendu, which is awesome. After it's attacked. So Yoda's really cool. I check out my Yoda Yellow list, which is my take on it. Again, I'm still working on the Yellow Blue one, but Yoda Yellow was really sweet. Just using now there are 2 of them to cheat out your units, cheat out your Luke Skywalker at 5 cost. I think everyone's still kind of figuring out Yoda. I think this was the only Yoda list I saw that was relevant at all, but I thought it was really interesting. They can push damage. They can really gain a ton of life quickly once they get around the 7-8 resource turn. And then, they have the mill strategy with Satine, Cries, Vigilance, Restock. They don't play Kanan Jarrus, which I would probably play Kanan instead of Duchess Champion because it goes with the mill and it helps gain more life. And I just think Duchess Champion is very... I wish it was just a Sentinel. I wish it didn't have your opponent has to have 3 more units, because then it's just a 1/8, which is like, I don't want to pay 4 resources for a 1/8. So I'd probably play Kanan, but good looking list and super interesting and cool. I like the Val inclusion as well to give things counters on your deck, so you're getting, you have multiple ways of pumping up your units with Val, with Forces with Me, with Obi-Wan. So cool list, very creative. And I think, because it's a new archetype, I think it has a lot of potential, but, we'll kind of see how it develops over time. Again, check out my Yoda Yellow list. That deck is a lot of fun. But, yeah, I think that's all the decks. So, you kind of see there's a diverse range of things that I think could be relevant. I didn't mention Vader Green or Palp Red. I think those 2 decks just have a really, really hard time against aggro because they don't have as many ways to slow them down besides like Sentinels and, the subtle life gain early on. There's not a ton of ways to gain life. So I think they're just kind of on the outskirts right now, and they have a hard time with the heavy space units too, because those colors don't have the best responses to a heavy space decks like Jango. Like you have Black Sun Starfighter, which just immediately dies, and it's easy to ping and kill. Like you have to ping it twice to kill it with Cad Bane or with Jango's plethora of units that ping things when they come in. It's just, I think those decks are on the outskirts. What's another one? I think Luke Green may still have some potential, but it's, work in progress. I saw an interesting list, I think it was like a week ago, that I thought was pretty cool. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video and the breakdown. I will do my best to get all these lists in the description below. But as always, y'all have a good one and peace out.